We're often asked about the viability of renting property here, and it's something that really needs to be thought about carefully. Wherever you are, renting a property's no small thing. There are some particular things that you need to consider when it comes to renting a property in a place like Paraguay that may not be so evident, because we do things in a certain way where we come from. Renting has been a very regimented, regulated process, but it's definitely not the case here in Paraguay. So it's easy to come here and go through the processes, but to face some situations that you've not had to navigate before. So it's really an important aspect of coming, because almost inevitably you will be renting for a period of time, and we always recommend that it's a good idea to rent for quite a while before you buy a property. And whether you like it or not, that will probably happen, because the chances of coming and finding your perfect property and purchasing it, that's really a rarity. So we've got to face up to the reality that we'll probably be renting for a reasonable period of time, so we had better just get our heads around it. I think to answer this question, we first need to define the discussion, because it's a different proposition when you're talking about renting an apartment, say in Asuncion, compared to coming to somewhere like Qroo or anywhere around the country and renting a house. Because I've stayed in apartments in Asuncion, and they have been pretty much like what you would expect an apartment in most parts of the world. And that's the way that things go with apartments generally. They're pretty well stock standard, built generally to a similar standard, give or take, depending on what you're paying. If you were sitting in an apartment in Asuncion, you could be sitting in an apartment in just about anywhere in the world. But when you rent a house here, well, it's an entirely different proposition often, because I can say for sure that the houses that I've lived in Paraguay have been significantly different to the houses that I've been used to living in other parts of the world. Some of them have been great, some of them not so great, but it just needs to be kept in mind that you're dealing with very different types of situations than what you may be used to. So the first question needs to be asked, and only you can answer it: would you want to rent on a continuing basis, long term, maybe forever, here as opposed to buying? I don't know anyone who's renting that I can think of the top of my head who is entirely happy with the place that they're in. It's not to say that they're not happy. We've got a nice house here in Qroo, but there's definitely things about it that if I owned it, I would like to change immediately. For example, just recently I posted a video about falling over and dislocating my finger. Well, apart from me just being a fool, the reason why that happened is because our steps in the area where I was walking are kind of different on every level. And as you probably know, that's a recipe for disaster. Just one of many things that you will often find in houses here in Paraguay, that things will be built, let's just say, in an unorthodox way. And they're the sort of things that, yeah, you can live with them sometimes. A lot of people would just prefer to have them sorted, and some people actually can't live with some of these things. If you're renting a property, it really puts you in a difficult situation, because you can't readily go and start doing engineering changes to the house and changing the stairs and all sorts of things. So it's going to be a real challenge to find this sort of house that you may be comfortable with, that you can rent long term, that you can live in without it driving you mad. And there's various other things too, plumbing and leaking roofs, all these sort of things that aren't uncommon in a lot of houses here. But as a renter, you're going to be really struggling to find solutions for, unless you've got a really receptive landlord. A lot of these issues will just be explained away as being part of the deal when you live in a house in a lot of parts of Paraguay. You're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to deal with that one way or another. So it's an entirely subjective question as to whether you can rent indefinitely here. It's up to you, and it depends entirely on your situation. In terms of finding a rental property, we find the best way is generally just to go onto Telegram or another social media outlet. The Airbnbs outside of Asuncion tend to be quite expensive, so it's not generally the best way to go. And there is a reasonable amount of rentals available. It's not a problem generally to find a house or an apartment, and so in regards to supply, that's not too much of an issue we find. In Qroo here, we pay 2 milioni per month, which is really quite a good deal. We've got a nice 2-bedroom house that we've kind of jigged up to be sort of 3-bedroom, and it's a nice basic house, but that's a good price. I would be suggesting that anyone that was thinking about coming somewhere like this, well, if they find something like that, they've got a good deal, but you'd probably be going up from there. And there are some really flash houses and some pretty significant rental prices. So just like anywhere, there's a real variation. But when you're thinking about renting a property, there are some key things that I would strongly urge you to think about and take into account. The first thing is obviously security, and I've spoken about that on previous videos. It's not uncommon to find rental properties that don't have as decent security as, say, the place where the person who owns the property might have afforded themselves. It's a rental property. They don't want to over capitalize. So you may find at times you are moving into a house that doesn't have bars on all windows, or doesn't have good enough gates or fences and locks. All these things are such that if you're looking to rent a property, you really have to ask the questions, look really carefully, and just don't accept that it's all going to be okay and that the landlord assures you that everything's fine. You really want the level of security on your place to be just like everyone else around here. You don't want it to be less, most definitely, because you're a foreigner and you've just moved into a rental property. That's never the sort of situation that you want to just take lightly and just assume that you're going to be okay, that it's just definitely going to be not a problem. You want to at least be vigilant to that. And in that regard, I wouldn't be backward in coming forward. If I was looking to rent a property and it didn't have those provisions, I probably wouldn't be renting it, or I'd be speaking to the landlord and saying, well, if you want me to rent this, these things will need to be put in place. And if they get a bit funny about it, we'll just say, well, why are the houses all around here of that standard? Why don't we have bars and the necessary things that everyone else around here seems to have? So that's just something to keep in mind. I would also be asking the landlord, has this property been subject to any break-ins? It seems like something that perhaps doesn't seem overly polite to ask. We've previously rented a property where that actually was the case, and we only heard through the grapevine after we moved in. And it was a little bit unsettling because we didn't know. This property that we were living in, we actually thought it was quite secure, and to this day I'm not sure as to how they actually broke in before we moved there, but knowing that there had been a break-in really made us change the way that we did things, and we were more careful when we went out, and we just took extra precautions. So it's something that you really want to know, and it's not a silly question here in Paraguay or anywhere else really. I think it's also a rental property, so there's been other people living in it, and it's not impossible to imagine that there might be more than one key floating out around there. So just things that you need to keep in mind. Don't want to overhype the whole security thing, but you are a foreigner, you've moved into a new country, you're living in a rental property, you don't know the history of it. All things that you definitely want to at least turn your mind to. Electrical safety. We talked about it on a previous video, but between the time that we made this video and now, I've heard about other issues relating to electricity issues and some things that have been found in some houses that have really caused significant concern, and it's just heightened my awareness about the realities of the issue of safety in the house. I think ideally you'd be asking it on the way in, and it also relates to things like your devices. We've spoken about that before, I won't harp on it, but if you're going to rent a house long term, it's probably a really good time to be speaking to the landlord and saying, well, we're a pretty good prospect, we're going to be renting here for quite a while, but we've got these things that we want you to deal with because our devices are very expensive, and if they do malfunction, we may be asking you to replace them. That's something that will probably get their attention. Whether you can action that or not, it's just something that perhaps you might want to consider. The issue of the bond swiper, the landlord who takes the bond or the security that you've paid for the property, it's generally the case that people will pay 2 months rent, usually maybe one month's rent, but it's just like many other parts in the world. You pay a bond for the property to allow for any damage or things that need to be done when it's time for you to leave, and it's fairly standard. But here in Paraguay, there's absolutely no legislation in place to protect you as the tenant, so it's not uncommon to find landlords who routinely swipe that security or that bond. We have had that experience where we lived in a apartment and the landlord claimed that there was this and that. It was pretty much just shoddy workmanship. All the handles would fall off because they were cheap and nasty, but we got the bill for it and they pretty much just swiped our security and repainted the property. And that's very common too, is that there are certain landlords that will expect that the property needs to be repainted every time a tenant moves out, so invariably you're going to lose that money. Not always, but it's not uncommon. So if possible, it's good to ask around. Definitely if you're looking to rent around the area that we're in, you can always contact us and we're happy to let you know about the certain landlords that make that their practice. When we moved out, some other people moved out of the apartment right on top of us, and they also had their bond automatically taken from them. So just something to keep in mind, particularly if they ask for more than a couple of months. You'd really want to be careful because there's nothing in place for you, there's no protection, and it's not uncommon. And it's also not just Paraguayans, for the record, that have a tendency to do that. So don't be surprised if that's something that you at least have to keep in mind and perhaps even deal with. For us personally, it's hopefully going to be a temporary arrangement because we value being able to do our own thing without having to get Mr. Plod from the Thought Police to come around and take your fee and harass you because you have the temerity to put up a garden shed or to do something else on your property that's just so unacceptable to the authorities. So that's a real feature of Paraguay, and one that we're really looking forward to enjoying. And it's those little freedoms that make up our life and ultimately make all the difference. As long as we're aware of these things, everything's going to turn out fine, I'm sure. So until next time, take care. Ciao.